Just, we're going to finish up 3.6 today, and like I said, shouldn't take us too long. You should have plenty of time to finish it in class. As a reminder, we took that forgiveness quiz yesterday. You have another one scheduled for tomorrow. Please be studying, guys. Okay, please. And it's optional. I'm not going to force anyone to do it. It's up to you if you want to do it, okay? So that'll be tomorrow at the beginning of class. I'm going to do it real quick. I'm not even going to review, so you guys need to review on your own. And then we have one day of 3.7 tomorrow. Then Thursday, Friday is test review, which I'll have ready for you tomorrow if you want it early. And then Monday, Tuesday is the test, okay? So let's get started on this. What we learned yesterday was how to graph with a phase shift, if you remember. And really, the worst part of it, if there was a worst part, was dealing with the x-axis. But I kind of showed you, if you find the first point, the fifth point, it's not that bad. So we're going to review that using example 7. So let's start with that. Given a cosine function, we're going to pull out the information and sketch the graph. So we know amplitude is the A value. No flip there. Now be careful. Common mistake is thinking that B is the period. B is not the period. You can find the period using B, or you can find B using the period. They're super closely related, but we just have to remember that formula, which is 2 pi divided by P. P is 2. So our period is pi. Remember what period is. Period is how much of the x-axis we use to make our 5 points. Okay? So if there's no phase shift, it would be from 0 to pi. And that's equals. Period equals 2 pi over 2. Okay. So the amount of the x-axis I'll use to make those 5 points is from 0 to pi. Now we are going to have a phase shift, right? We have a phase shift here, which is just a left or right movement, but it also gives you your first point. It moves all your points right or left. Shifts them, lets you right or left. So that changes where you end your point, but it's still, your period is still pi. No matter where you start, where you end, it has to just still be a section of the x-axis equal to pi. And remember we learned yesterday that if you have a plus sign, it's opposite. So this is actually less 3 pi over 2. So to graph this, anytime we have a phase shift, we have to kind of do this extra little step, which is know that our first point is our phase shift, and then we're going to find our fifth point. And then usually, 99.9% of the time, we can figure out the x-axis in between without having to do a whole bunch of other math. Because remember, important to remember that you don't have to ever make one of these graphs for my test or the AP exam. You just have to be able to find the one that matches correctly, okay? So let's start with our first point, which is the phase shift, right? Phase shift gives us our first point. And left means left of 0, so our first point is negative 3 pi over 2. And then to find our last point, we have to go pi distance from our first point. So we always do our first point plus the period to get our fifth point. And it's really easy to change pi to a common denominator. Remember, you won't have a calculator all the time for these, so you need to know how to make a number add to another number if they're fractions. And that is, this is 1 pi, so you can make this 2 pi over 2, right? So as a common denominator, because 2 over 2 is 1. And that gives you negative pi over 2. So we have our first point and our last point. So let's look at what we're graphing. Cosine. Cosine without a flip starts where? Up, down, middle, Egypt, where? Up. Cosine, up, middle, down, middle, up. So this will be an up, this will be an up. So you want to put your first and your fifth on there, and then it makes it easy to break up the x-axis. So our first point will be up at 2 at negative 3 pi over 2. And our last point will be up at 2 at negative pi over 2, right? Up, up. Now we just have to see what we have going on in between. Nice. We have 1, 2, 3 lines in between, and we have 3 points. So now we can just do our up, middle, down, middle, up. Remember, make it as curvy as you can, because it should be And that's it. Not difficult to graph at all. Any questions on that one? So that's kind of a review of yesterday. Also review is being able to describe all the transformations, and we're going to do the rule afterwards. And we're not going to graph it. So if I go through this, I see a negative, I see a 2, I see a 3, and I see a negative 2 pi. There's 4 different transformations going on. In any order you can list them. Let's try to use our varsity math language and go through those. So anybody want to give me one? Anyone? Zach? So flip over the x-axis. Is there a better word than flip? Just in case we get a really picky grader. Reflect, right? Reflect. I'm not saying that they would mark it wrong. I don't know. But if you have control over, like, should I use reflect or flip? You know, better choice is reflect. And over which axis you would definitely want to say, okay? Because we have reflections over the y-axis, even though we don't have to do those here, but that is a thing, right? There is such a thing. Somebody else want to give me something? Go ahead, Remy. Okay, great. Yep, she jumped right into the phase shift, right? The C value. Say it the way you said it again. Translation. Is that what you said? Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to shorten it. Horizontal translation, right 2 pi is perfectly fine. I'm just going to shorten it, so either one is fine. I'm just going to say translation, right 2 pi. So you want to say right or left. Shift is fine. Translation's probably better. Okay. Somebody else? Give me one. Anybody? Come on. Nobody has another one for me? Jocelyn's trying not to make eye contact with me. Daniel? Yep, perfect. Vertical, important. Vertical dilation by factor of 2. Notice he didn't say negative 2. Correct, correct, correct. There's that one number left. This is the hardest one. Nobody wants to tackle that 3. Not horizontal translation. It is a horizontal dilation by factor of what? Not negative 3, 1/3. Okay, so let's review, that weird last one. For the rule, I've always told you guys, and this holds true for every single function, not just sine or cosine. If it happens inside the parentheses, and by the way, brackets are just another level of parentheses. If it happens in parentheses or brackets, it happens to the x. If it's on the outside of the brackets and parentheses, it happens to the y. So when I see that 3 on the inside, that tells me horizontal. And remember, anything in the parentheses is always wonky, right? So it's 1/3 times all your x values. You have to flip it. And instead of going minus, right, it's opposite in here also. And then to go to the right, you would add, right? That takes you to the right. Add 2 pi. You can see how someone could mess that up. So everything in the parentheses happens to the x, and it's always something weird like that. And then the negative and the 2 get multiplied by all your y values. So if you were asked to write a rule, it's really easy to tell which goes where. You just have to remember the inside stuff. Okay? Question? Oops, sorry. Yeah. So what we were just asked to do is write all the transformations out. Okay? So we have next page. We're going to graph another one. So this is more practice from yesterday. And guys, listen, the way I always model this for you is I pull out all the information for you, and I'm going to keep doing that. Any order that you put in, I mean, the stuff that I'm about to write here is not part of your grade or anything, unless there was like a line where it asked for like, what is the amplitude? So whatever you want to write is fine with me. So like, for example, amplitude is 2. I like to write that it's a flip. You might not see that other people write a flip there. They just remember that it is. That helps me remember, okay? What I never want to write is a negative 2. okay? I do have a b value, but I don't care about b so much. I care about the period, right? To be able to graph, I need a period, and I have b, and so I'm going to do 2 pi divided by pi over 3. But remember, when you divide by a fraction, you're doing keep, change, flip. So if you want to show all the steps, you want to write it as a fraction first and then, I don't at this point. I know I'm going to keep, change to multiplication, and flip that. And then the pi's cancel, and I'm left with 6. Okay, so show as much or as little work. Remember, this is not part of your grade. This is you organizing your information however you want. We do not have a phase shift, right? There's no C value. And then we have a D value, which is your midline at y equals 3 or 3, okay? So what we have to do is graph from 0 to 12. Well, the reason we're happy that there's no phase shift, we love it when there's no phase shift. Life is so much easier without a phase shift, because then we don't have to worry about first and fifth point. Anytime there's no phase shift, you start at 0, right? So we're going to go from 0 to 6, and that will be 1 period. 5 points between 0 and 6, and then we'll go from 6 to 12. So we'll basically write 2 periods. Cosine with a flip, so instead of starting up, we'll start down. So this would be down, middle, up, middle, down. Do you have to write that? Nope. It just helps me. So I know my first and my last point, which are going to be at 0 and 6, are going to start down, right? Down at 2. But wait a second, I forgot. Anytime there's a midline, you want to put that in first, because that shifts all your points up for you automatically. And instead of using 0, 0 as your middle, you use your midline as your middle. So now when I go to graph my down point at 2, what that means is 2 below the midline, okay? So we're 2 below the midline at 0 and at 6. Now what that did is it framed out for me my chunk, my period, right? I know the other 3 points have to be in between these. So right in the middle of 0 and 6 would be 3. So I did this one, I did this one. Let's do our up. Up would be at 3 to above the midline. And then in between these is where my middles will go, and it's not even. In between 0 and 3 is 1.5. So just approximate that, about 1.5. And you just want to try and make it as equidistant as possible. And again, it's multiple choice for the most part for you guys, so you don't have to stress about that too much. But let's do it again, because it told us to go from 0 to 12. So let's do another one from 6 to 12. Between 6 and 12 would be 9. And then approximately 1.5 in between would get me my other. So there it is, from 0 to 12. Okay, so our last 2 problems are example 10 and 12. Example 10, everyone thought was going to be so hard. These will be your favorite. These are the easiest ones. These are given information in words. You are going to translate that into the letters that they are and put them into the equation. We're going to write, first of all, a sine equation with this information in it. So we know amplitude is A. Phase shift is C. If there was a vertical shift, that would be D. That leaves B. Remember, period is not B. They do not equal each other, okay? Period does not equal B. Really important. It's a common mistake I see. So we have to find B. It's the same formula. Remember, 2 pi divided by what you have gives you what you want. I want B, so I'm going to do 2 pi divided by my period, which is keep, change, flip. So B is 3, right? 2 pi divided by 2 pi over 3, keep, change, flip. 2 pi's cancel, just left with 3. So now I can write my sine function. Y equals, amplitude comes right after the equal sign, then the word sin, not sin, sine. And whether you use brackets or parentheses doesn't matter. The most proper way is if you're going to have two sets of parentheses, you do brackets and parentheses, but that's not something anyone would mark wrong for you, okay? The reason I know that I'm going to have brackets and parentheses before I even start writing is if I always have a B value, right? B comes right away. And since I have a phase shift, I have to open some parentheses, and that would be X. And then to the right would be minus I over 3. So just understand, brackets are just like the second level of parentheses, but it's not wrong ever to do double parentheses, okay? So don't get worried about that, but of course I'm going to try and write it properly, like the most proper way. And if there was a D value, it would come after my bracket, but there wasn't. Okay, let's just do one more of those. Amplitude, phase shift, vertical shift. Period is not B, but we can use it to find our B. 2 pi divided by the period would be 1/2 or 0.5, either one. So y equals, amplitude comes right after the equal sign. This is a cosine function, so COS. I have a phase shift, so I know I'm going to put brackets personally. Then your B, parentheses, X. If we're going to the left, don't forget that would be plus, always opposite. X plus pi over 4. And then down 2 would be minus 2 at the end. Good? Does that make sense? Pretty simple. Juan, you getting this? All right. If you were half asleep, fully asleep, halfway listening, this last one is so important. Please, please, please pay attention, okay? What this next and final problem is going to do for you is going to start introducing you to something that's coming up for the next few days that we're going to work on a lot, okay? So hold that thought. I'm going to show you how to do this one. It's easy. It's pretty easy, not hard at all. But then I'm going to tell you something else about it that is what's coming that I really need you guys to pay attention to, okay? Because it's really going to help you tomorrow on the test review and on the test. So hold that thought. I just want to get your attention. That's why I said all that early. All right. Exactly what we just did, but instead of them giving us amplitude and period and stuff in words, we're going to pull it off the graph and then write the equation for it, okay? So let's think about all the things that we could pull off of a graph, okay? We could pull off an amplitude. We could pull off the period, right? And from that, we could get the B, right? Those two kind of go hand in hand. You can't get the B directly off the graph, but we can get the period off the graph and then translate it to a B. We might have a phase shift, and we might have a midline, right? So phase shift, midline, you know A is amplitude. Those are the 4 things that we could possibly have, okay? So first thing you want to do maybe is decide what is the shape of this graph. So if I start at 0, would this be a middle, an up, or a down? That's a middle. So right away, the first thing I can tell from this graph is that I do have a midline, right? Because I'm not using 0, 0 as my middle. It's somewhere else. So, right, Zach, I heard you say middle, down, middle, up, middle. So what is my midline? What number am I hitting on all my middles? Three. I didn't hear. Sorry. Middle, down, middle, up, middle. Now, if you couldn't tell that by looking at that, so my D is 3. If you couldn't tell by looking at, we have a formula for that, guys. You could add your max plus your min and divide by 2. So that would get you 3. But now that you know these patterns, you could kind of just follow the graph and see where am I hitting every time I say mid, okay? But it's at 3. That gave us our D. So if I'm starting in the middle, this must be a sine graph, right? So what's my amplitude? Well, Amplitude is the distance from my midline to my my midline to my max, or midline to my min. It doesn't matter, but I think you guys would agree that that is 2. And if we're starting at 0, that's middle down. Is that a flip or no? Middle up is the way regular sine goes. So this is a flip. Middle down, middle up, middle. Got to know those patterns. All right. So if we're starting at 0, this is the important part, guys. Please listen to me. We are starting at 0, 0. That's what we just decided amongst us. That's going to be the thing I'm going to switch in a minute. But since we're right now, what we're doing, we're starting at 0, we won't have a phase shift. That's what that means. When you have no phase shift, you start at 0. We love having no phase shift. It makes life easier. All that's left now is our period. The period is, let's see, so middle, down, middle, up, middle. How much of the x-axis did I use to make 5 points? 4 pi. But remember, that's not b, right? b is 2 pi divided by the period. 2/4 simplifies down to 1/2. So now, there's just an extra step, basically, of taking everything out of the graph. Hi. Great.
Sorry to interrupt. When you get a shot, can you do an employee survey?
Sure. Yeah, I'll do it during my planning period.
Trying to do my due diligence.
Yeah, no problem. Of course. Okay, so guys, now this is like what we had on the last problem. We got everything. Let's put it in the equation. So sine graph, so this would be y equals, it's a flip, so I'm going to have a negative in front of my amplitude, sine, no phase shift, so I don't need brackets, 1/2 x plus 3. Did we understand that? Did we understand that? Do we understand that? May does. What'd I do? Oh, okay. I thought you said something. I thought you were pointing out a mistake. Listen to what I'm going to tell you right now, because this is what's going to get tricky starting tomorrow. So today, when you look at this graph and I say write a sine or cosine equation for it, doesn't matter which one, okay? Just said find the equation. You're going to pick the easiest. Why wouldn't you? Okay? Which is starting at 0. Figure out your path. Starting at 0. Figure out your period, all the other stuff. And that was pretty simple, right? But here's the thing. Listen. What if I said to you, nope, it has to be cosine. You have to make this a cosine graph. We can. We could start here with a phase shift right pi. Let me show you something, guys. What would happen is the amplitude would still be 2, and we might have a flip or not. Let's see. If I start down, yep, this is going to have a flip, because cosine normally starts up. So I would have a flip. My period and my b wouldn't change. That will never change, no matter what 5 points I use. But because I didn't start at 0, I started at pi. That's to the right, so you have to put a negative in front of it, pi, and the d wouldn't change. So look, I could have written this as a cosine graph, and it would have looked like this. Y equals -2 cosine b value, x minus pi plus 3. These two are the same graph. That's what sinusoidal means. It's sine or cosine, depending on where you start. I just did 2 of them. We could have started here. We could have started here and done middle up, middle down, middle. I would have had a sine graph without a flip with a phase shift of 2 pi. I could have started here and done a cosine graph with a phase shift without a flip because it's starting up. There's an infinite number of equations that will match a graph depending on which direction you phase shift and how far. Because remember, this goes on forever. You could keep phase shifting 1 more point to right, left, left, and it just keeps changing it. But if I graph these, they're exactly the same. If I put them in my graphing calculator, which I did, and I'll show you. So what's coming tomorrow is you're going to be forced into finding phase shifts because it's not going to let you pick the easiest one necessarily. And that's where it starts to get tricky, okay? So for today, you choose whatever you want, which if I were you, I would always choose not to have a phase shift and start at 0, okay? But tomorrow on, it's going to get more complicated. So if you're not here tomorrow, you need to watch that video. All right, let's go to the homework. Oh, I said I was going to show you. I put them both in my calculator. Trust me, I typed those both in. I'm not going to take the time to do it. But look, when I graph, I know you can hardly see it. It looks like one graph. That's because they're right on top of each other. They're the same thing, okay? So when I put both of those in, one sine, one cosine with the phase shift, they graph right on top of each other because they're the same thing is the point, okay? Exciting. All right, I'm going to do number 1 and number 5 with you, so please get ready for that. All right, number 1. A, phase shift is C. Shh, guys, I'm doing homework with you. I'm doing 1 and 5. I'm almost done, then you can chit-chat while you work. And vertical shift would be D. Period is not B, but we can use the period to find B. Now write your equation. Amplitude of 4, it told us sine, phase shift, so I'm going to go ahead and use brackets. B is 2, not pi, right? B is 2. And if I go to the right, is that going to be plus 1/2 or minus 1/2? Minus. And there is no D, but if there was, I'd put it right at the end there. Right? So 2, 3, and 4, I don't think you'll have any problem with. Let's do a graph together. Go to number 5. Let's practice one more together. I'm still doing homework with you, so stay with me. Amplitude, 2. The period would be 2 pi divided by the B. Okay. Can't simplify that. And phase shift, right pi over 3. Anytime we have a phase shift, we'll do our little 1 and 5. Our first point to the right would be positive pi over 3. Our 5th point is our first point plus the period. That's 3 pi over 3, which simplifies to pi. Cosine, without a flip, first point will be up, 5th point will be up. Up, middle, down, middle, up. So let's put those both on, and then we can easily fill in the middle. So up at 2 at pi over 3. Up at 2 at pi. I framed it out. That's how much of the x-axis I'll use. And now I can just do up, middle, down, middle, up. So the 0 is my midline, right? And that's it. Okay? Graphing these is not difficult. All right. Now we'll put the rest of the key up in one sec. You're going to finish this with time left over, I think. So use that time. Do you need to study for your retake? Do you need to work on any of your other homeworks? We have a homework check on Thursday. Mm-hmm. Falling asleep.